We are your home theater and AV questions answered. This is AVRant. Want your home theater or AV question answered by Tom and Rob? Send it to question@avrant.com. Welcome to another edition of AVRant. I'm Tom Andrew, and I'm here with
Rob H. This is AVRant. It's your home theater and AV questions answered. I'm back after a very much unexpected week off for me. I guess I'll dive right into it. I don't know what's going on with my camera today. If you're watching the YouTube thing, stuff shifted around that I didn't touch a thing, but I did. There was a Windows update, of course, waiting for me. So who knows what the heck that did to my camera. So sorry that I'm looking very Smurfish today. But yeah, anyway, I'm sure I can adjust that in the background. I'm not going to get into too many details because it's not me that this happened to, family member, but quite serious health things. When we make light of home theater and say, hey, not a matter of life and death and that type of stuff. Well, this really was a matter of life and death, very genuinely so. That kept me away from the podcast last week. So I tweeted out about it just to let people know. I thought there was going to be no episode whatsoever. It was a surprise to me and a happy surprise to everyone, I hope, when Lee Overstreet very kindly filled in last week and didn't go through our normal topic list because I had no time to put any of the questions on there. But
we explained all this last week, so
absolutely.
The episode.
I want to give my gratitude and my surprise for that. I was happy that happened. Kept the podcast going. Make sure our Patreon supporters aren't getting gypped for the month. So that was all.
I feel like that's an offensive term these days.
Oh, I guess it is. I should be more aware of that. Yeah, you're right.
You should.
I didn't intend it that way. I apologize.
This is how it insidiously slips in.
This is how
I've been saying that for about 50 years. So it's only recently that somebody pointed it out to me. I was
that's true. Yeah.
I guess that's right. I never really thought about that.
Yeah. No malice intended on my part. I threw
on behalf of all of America and Canada, apparently.
Right. That's what happens when you start getting into middle age and start saying things that, you just said.
And the younger generation just looks at you and like, oh, that's the way that generation is. Wait a second.
Right.
I'm still young.
It. Will be forever. But yes, anyway, wanted to say things have certainly stabilized. It was a very busy week. It was a productive week. And that sort of rule of threes, things happen, tragedies happening in threes certainly was the case. One of my aunts, 2 visits to the hospital, long-term care now set up. So like I say, some pretty serious stuff that was happening there, but happy to say she's actually shown considerably more improvement than any of us expected. So that's on the upswing there. Another one of my aunts, I think I mentioned this, we moved her into assisted living not that long ago, and so there's been a transition period going on there, and there was plenty more to get done, all to happen this week. My parents have been doing a tremendous amount, except that in the middle of last week, my mom tested positive for COVID, and so that all happened at once, and so there were fewer things that she was able to do in person, of course, wanting to make sure that wasn't getting spread around, avoiding the rest of the family while we very much needed to all be in contact and doing things, so a few more things fell on my shoulders in that regard, which I'm not complaining about, but all of it is to be an explanation for as much as I put into this podcast and want to be here, and I think that's pretty self-evident by this point. It is my explanation for having not been here. So I don't think I really owe an apology, but I do regret, anybody who was left hanging there for a week. But I think that part people will understand and be able to muddle their way through. And we'll get to the questions this week.
All right.
Yeah.
Like I said last week, we're not doing the questions without Rob because it's just a double podcast. You might as well just not listen to the first one because the second one's going to all happen again.
I could take some quibbles with that, but I'm not going to waste the time on it.
Honestly, Lee and I had zero time to come up with it. I think we were just like, let's just talk and see what happens. So, if we were like, well, that wasn't, that wasn't very good. Well, you do it. I don't give a crap. All right. This let's go really quickly through what we watched because we didn't watch much.
I sure did not. I've just kept up with Barry. That is on HBO. I'm watching it through Crave because that's where I get the HBO content. So I very much enjoyed that series as it's been going along. It's in its 4th and final season now. It is currently airing week to week, so it's not as though I can binge the entire last season or anything. Just wanted to remark, I know a lot of people were saying seasons 2 and 3 they thought it had shifted from not being a dark comedy anymore to being much more of a dramedy or even just a outright drama. I didn't feel that way. I thought it was very funny all the way along. I think a large part of that is if you've had any like theater kid experience, any acting background, there is stuff I am cracking up at that I don't think everybody would. I think it is kind of specific for if you have any sort of theater background. There's stuff that isn't like overtly funny, but if you've ever been a part of it, it is very, very funny and very, very well depicted. So I never thought it turned away from being a dark comedy. This fourth and final season, the last couple of episodes, it went in a direction I did not see coming, did not expect whatsoever. I have enough faith in them because it's been a very good show that they know where they're going, but it's thrown me for a little bit of a curveball, which is very much obviously the intention. So interested to see where Barry goes. And if you haven't checked it out and you're interested in sort of a dark comedy, it is, what's his name? Bill Hader. He used to be on SNL. He does really, really well in this. So yeah. And oh boy, if you've ever dated an actress in your life, that's some good satire going on there. That's some good stuff.
It seems like a show I would like. Definitely up my alley.
Yeah.
I have all those experiences of which you speak.
There you go. I thought that was directed quite a bit at Tom, my comment there.
Star Wars Visions Season 2 came out. May the 4th be with you and all that.
I suppose so.
Then there was another cartoon that came with the Jedi thing, the Jedi Academy or something. I haven't
kept up with all that, no.
The Visions 2, so I liked the last Visions one. I thought it was good. I thought it was fine. This one I thought was also good. If you're into animation, every episode, and they got the Wallace and Gromit guy to do one.
Oh, okay.
I think it's him. It looks like that type of animation. Is it Aardvark or something like that? That's his studio or whatever. I don't know.
I wouldn't be able to tell you. Yeah.
I don't know. So if as you're going to expect, some of the episodes you're going to like more than others. There's a lot of Sith talk at the very beginning, and then it gets more Empire focused. I'll tell you one thing that Disney is apparently really leaning into is the fact that, yes, they are, in fact, space Nazis. Like, they are... they used to be sort of like, they're just jerks who can't hit things with blasters.
Was that ever in question? Was that not quite always the case?
But if you really look at, I'm thinking about the Star Wars, the movies and stuff. Clearly that they are depicted in that garb, but you never really see them acting. Darth Vader kills more of his own people than he kills anybody else. He just goes around force choking everybody to death who pisses him off.
But the Empire in general, I didn't think there was very much like hiding the fact that those were space Nazis.
I think some people, based on the stickers on the back of people's cars here in Florida, identify far too closely with the Empire.
Is that really our yardstick for?
I don't. Unfortunately, it's where I live, so I have no choice but to be surrounded by it constantly. But they really are leaning into the fact that these are not good guys.
No, they're not.
They are not.
They are the evil Empire, Tom. That was made quite clear to us from the get-go.
From the get-go. But I don't think some people have gotten it, and they're like, wait, maybe we should remind people. So, so some of the episodes are quite dark. A little bit darker than I expected. I'll be honest with you. But I do really like this, that they're exploring more things, there's a lot of themes within Star Wars that are so much bigger than just, if you're a Skywalker, you get powers, and if you're not a Skywalker, then you can suck it. That sort of thing. So I do like that they are exploring more stuff. So I thought it was pretty good. Some of the episodes are hit or miss. There's 2 episodes that involve climbing that pissed me off because... That's not how you climb.
Gotcha.
That's how you die. They're like, I'm worried about your safety. Here's a rope that you do not tie into and then go climb on cliffs that are thousands of feet above the ground, and don't use that rope for any part of it. Whatever.
Yep.
Just
when you're into any hobby. I mean, anytime we see home theater setups in movies, a lot of times you're like, really? That's how you think those are set up, are you?
Those are speakers, are they? The one that's near the ceiling and the other one that's on the ground. Those are the 2 speakers because they looked neat in the bookshelf.
Or like me,
whenever
you see somebody soldering on screen, it's like, nope, nobody knew how to solder. Couldn't tell the actor just a tip or two.
Clearly, there's nobody in the crew that has ever touched a soldering iron.
Right.
Ever.
Right.
I have touched one, but it's only to move it from place to place because it was in my way. But I have no idea how to solder. But then again, I wouldn't pretend to.
Right.
All right. So yes, they're short. I think I watched over 2 sittings. I watched the entire Visions too. So they're all very short, and the animation is all very different. So if you don't like the animation in one, don't worry. The next one is completely different.
Okay.
So some of them are lighthearted, some of them are
much
very
more
dark.
of an anthology then.
Yes. And they kind of seem to go all over the place as far as timeline too. Some seem to happen like right after, the Return of the Jedi, and some of them are a little bit later. So we'll see. All right, this is AVRant, the podcast that answers, this week, your home theater and AV questions. Get your questions answered. All you have to do is ask us by emailing us at question@avrant.com. Go to our website, find our older episodes, along with our show notes, of which last week's show notes were brief, because I don't do that. I write enough. I don't want to write on that. I don't want to write on AVRant. I don't need to be verbose over there. I'm already way too verbose over AV gadgets.
No timestamps last week.
No. No, there were not.
No, there were not.
And there was minimal editing. I'll be honest with you. Probably should have cut some of that out. Some of it was just us rambling on. You can find our Flickr albums as well. When we talk about pictures, they will be up on the Flickr album, and you can see what we're talking about. Make some of these questions a little bit easier to understand for those of you that are trying to learn. Because that's what I really think the podcast answering the questions about is not about, yes, we are helping a person, but you hearing the answer and seeing what we're talking about can maybe have you look at your room in a completely different light, or your speakers, or your whatever.
I don't particularly want an audience of literally one for each individual question. That wouldn't be much of a podcast.
I'm going to refrain from the obvious joke here.
Gotcha.
Okay. Contact us or you can find us at facebook.com/AVRant podcast, youtube.com/AVRant, where Rob will be very blue this week.
Yeah, I don't know what the heck's going on.
He's sad. He's a sad boy.
Well,
he's sad.
There is some of that going on in the background. Not too bad, but yeah. But no, this is just the camera's white balance refusing to cooperate with me.
J.J. Abrams directing his side of it. Don't worry, the lens flare is coming.
Dude, I need a flashlight.
You need a flashlight. Someone with a flashlight behind you to shine it directly into the. All right. Contact us directly. Rob@avrant.com is Twitter. Are you still using that?
Oh yeah, I'm still over there.
Still a thing?
Yeah, I still haven't switched yet.
At First Reflect, this is Twitter. I'm Tom@avrant.com. And then, of course, all of your complaints can go to Lee@avrant.com.
That is correct. It's the reason it exists.
If you didn't like last week's podcast, please send very detailed reasons as to why. Any video responses or podcast responses, criticisms, Lee@avrant.com. Well, let's thank our listeners of the week. To become a listener of the week, you support the podcast in some way. One of the ways you can do that is going to patreon.com/AVRantPodcast, where you can sign up to become a monthly supporter of the podcast. Every month they'll take some money from you, give most of it to us. And this week we have 137 patrons over at Patreon, including Jared. So thank you very much.
Yes, that's patreon.com/AVRantPodcast if you'd like to sign up to make an automatic monthly donation. So big thanks to our 137 patrons over there. It ticked back up. I guess people were like, hey, yeah, my credit card did expire. So that was very nice to see tick back up. And Jared, thank you for being one of them.
Yes, thank you, Jared. If you can't support us financially, support us in some other way, and we'll mention you here. Greg sent Rob the Harmony Ultimate Plus hub for Rob's parents that he had offered to several months back. He also put some other goodies in the box: a Harmony 1, a Harmony Smart Control, an older Harmony 659, as well as a pair of wired monolith earbuds and an MPOW headset.
That's right. Yes, so I don't mind at all. Thank you very much. Most of that was a surprise to me. I think he was like, hey, here's a whole bunch of electronics I'm not using anymore. I'd rather see them go somewhere than to the landfill, and I don't mind that one bit. Those MPOW headsets, look, I haven't listened to them yet, but it looks pretty nice, so I'm going to be happy to give those a try in a bit. Yeah, cool.
We also got some notes of gratitude for keeping the podcast going during everything, including Rob's current situation.
Yeah.
Whatever is on fire in the world right now, either physically or metaphorically.
Right.
Of which there are lots of things.
Yeah, there's no shortage. No shortage.
I know we are very isolated. I feel isolated over here from the rest of the world over here in America, but I understand there's some things going on in Somalia that I should know about. Somalia? Is that right? It's someplace in Africa, something is terrible.
Oh, I don't actually know details. I do not doubt it. It's entirely possible.
Hopefully, if you're hearing this podcast, you know more than us, because It's hard
I'm
to
out of
care
the
about
loop
everything.
on a lot of things.
Yes, he's got an excuse. What's my excuse? Selfish, self-centered, children. I don't know. Pick one.
Mm-hmm.
So, got notes of gratitude from Dan, who says he's so happy we're still doing the podcast. I am too.
Here we are.
Dan. Stan, Jared, who was away from listening to our podcast on a regular basis for a couple of years. Now he's playing catch up and often listening to about 4 episodes a day, which is
right.
Apparently he's in a hospital bed someplace with literally nothing else to do. That's about
how could things have changed, say, for the past 2 years? What could have happened during that
I have
time?
no clue.
Inexplicable.
Nothing. Nothing
understand.
important in the last 2 years.
Nope,
I got nothing.
Your daily, perhaps, commute when you listen to podcasts might have been disrupted for some unknown reason. Jared, you were the only one. Only one.
You were it.
Nobody else
weird.
can commiserate.
No, you were alone in this.
Welcome back, though. Welcome back.
Jeremy says, thanks for being entertaining and informative. He likes our What We Watch section, makes the podcast more personal. And if that section is too long, he can just skip forward. You're right, Jeremy. Way to take the onus upon yourself. Josh just discovered us on Spotify a couple of weeks ago and quickly went through all of our episodes there. We have more.
There are many more. You can come to avrant.com would be easiest, and you can scroll back for pages and pages and pages and pages and pages, and there they are. Huge archive.
Got another gratitude from Joseph and Bob. Bob loves AV gadgets. He asks if I'm also involved over at Pro Tool Reviews. If so, great work. I am not. He has a whole staff over there, though. He has a whole bunch of people over there that work
That is
for him.
Clint DeBoer, former co-worker of Tom's. Yeah.
Yes. And friend.
And
Don't
good
forget
friend.
friend. Julian says thanks. Brannon agrees with Lee that the only reason to keep cable TV is ESPN. And Rich suggested Sling TV for Lee. If all he really wants from cable TV is ESPN, Sling Blue can give him that for $40. Mm-hmm. And since Lee has an antenna already, Sling Air TV can connect to that and send live broadcast TV signals to the same Sling app. So there you go, Lee.
It could be a solution. That sounds quite reasonable.
And if Rich did not send that directly to Lee, Lee's going to have to listen to the podcast.
I'm pretty sure he was, that actually went to Lee at avrant.com. Wasn't really a complaint. Not sure if that's appropriate, Rich, but it should reach
yes.
Lee.
That is not the proper email to send positive information. That is only a complaint line. Get it right.
That's right. But I will say my thanks to Dan, Stan, Jared, Jeremy, Josh, Joseph, Bob, Julian, Brannon, and Rich. Thank you all very much for those notes of gratitude. They're very much appreciated. I did want to say on a personal level, many people sent me very kind messages through email and Twitter. I didn't have time to gather all of those up, and I was sure I was going to miss somebody, but I very much appreciated people who gave notes of just good vibes and well wishes and happy prayers and all those types of things, and I am very thankful for that. So thank you, everybody, for your understanding and your kindness.
All right. In the news, this comes from Andrew from over at AV Gadgets.
Mm-hmm.
Premium Audio Company, is a PAC, has added some new features to the current lineup of Onkyo, Integra, and Pioneer AV receivers. The info screen and apps got some nice enhancements to make it easier to see which high-end gaming features are available and active. Things like 120 Hertz, VRR, and ALLM. Mm-hmm. VRR is variable refresh rate. ALLM is auto low latency mode.
That's right.
Those statuses can be viewed on both the incoming and outgoing sides of the receiver's HDMI ports. So if you press the little button, it'll say input on one side, output on the other, and it tells you what you're getting.
That's right.
So 119 hertz apparently. Couldn't quite make it to 120.
They aren't showing the decimal points. There's a bunch of decimal points after that. So because it's 23.976 and it's 59.96 something, which they round up to 97, and so there's all these weird decimal points after a lot of those things. So the 119 is just indicating it isn't integer 120. It's the whatever it ends up being when you add all the decimals onto the end of that.
And since PAC also owns Klipsch, they've added a new feature dubbed Klipsch Optimizer Mode. If you own Klipsch speakers, you can choose what you have from a list of models. AV receiver will then ignore what is detected during auto setup measurements and instead set the crossovers for your speakers based on the specs and whatever has been programmed to the database that's being used.
Horrible.
Oh, what a terrible idea.
I know where they're coming from. There are people who recommend setting your speaker crossovers this way by looking up the specs. Where's the minus 3 dB point? Set it 10 hertz above that. That's pretty common advice that's out there. It is not advice that we agree with. We don't find that works in the real world because
how the bass response happens in your room from your speakers, just like from your subwoofers, it is room dependent. It changes from room to room. Just because the speaker in an anechoic chamber has a minus 3 dB point of whatever that might be, doesn't mean you actually have nice, flat, even response down to that frequency. In fact, it would be very surprising if you did. So we always want to set the crossovers between the speakers and the subwoofer based upon the room interactions, where it actually works best to do that in your specific room with your specific seating, and not just based on the specs on a spec sheet. But of course, what can they pre-program into an AV receiver? Well, they could only do something based on specs and whatever database they've created. So I see where they're coming from, but this is not something I would recommend.
No, do not use this.
No. And you don't
I actually
have
wrote
to.
an article a long time ago called Speaker Specs and Subwoofer Crossover. Should you match them or something like that? And it's basically what Rob just said.
Sure.
It's looking at those specs tells you almost nothing about what you should actually do.
And hey, you know, SVS still has stuff on their website and a tool that bases things upon that type of that type of approach. So, you know, plenty of places do it. We just don't recommend doing it that way.
Yeah. Over at Disney Plus, the MCU movie Ant-Man received a new American Sign Language option from the movie's main screen. Go to the Extras section and you can select the ASL version of the movie there. ASL performer Jack Cook appears in the lower right corner of the screen throughout the entire movie to translate all of the dialogue. I feel like this is good. This is great. I guess I'm expressing my complete ignorance of this, but I don't necessarily understand why it's better than having closed captioning.
Well, because closed captioning doesn't convey tone.
Okay.
You know, it's just text on the screen, and it doesn't convey when something is sarcastic, when something is humorous, that type of thing. And when you see the person using ASL, there's more tone conveyed.
So, you know, this is a perfect, for me at least, it's a perfect reminder that, or example of, or a reminder that if you don't have a lived experience within something, it's often easy to think, it's also often easy not to know things simply because you can't know them. And this is one of those cases for me where I was like, well, what about subtitles? Why don't we use any subtitles?
Which, of course, you know, subtitles and closed captioning is certainly better than absolutely nothing if you're hard of hearing or fully deaf. But yeah, I appreciate this. I mean, why shouldn't it be another available language option? We have lots of other language options available. There's, of course, some time and expense that goes into creating all the different language options. This would be perhaps even a little bit more because, of course, there has to be a video and then the overlay created. So perhaps there's a little bit more time and effort that goes into it than a purely audio track or creating a subtitle track. But yeah, I mean, as long as there are any companies willing to do this, it's not as though Disney did this directly. They farmed this out to a group that is doing this. It's sort of a trial run.
They did it directly. Would have been Mickey Mouse down in the corner or something.
Oh, sure. But which I wouldn't mind that either. If they want to do that, and perfectly fine with that. So
as long as they do it with the motion part of it that you were talking about.
Yeah, and I liked the way, you know, some people put it. You know, they're saying this, like, ASL is my language. That's my language. That's how I communicate. It's nice to see that as an option now. It's really never been there before. So.
Never. If you had asked me like what languages they should include, in a million years, I never would have come up with ASL.
And I mean,
never would have occurred to me. Now that's here, I'm like, oh yeah, that makes sense.
You're not alone, Tom. It's kind of remarkable that this is a first. You think back on it's like, gosh, that's kind of plainly obvious that we should have had this for ages. So
now,
there you go.
Now that you said it out loud, I'm like, why haven't we done this before?
Yeah, exactly.
So, especially with Disney movies. I mean, because they're so ubiquitous as far as who watches them. Like people from all walks of life watch them. It's just okay. I think it's great. I think it's great. LG Display, the physical manufacturing arm, not to be confused with LG Electronics, the consumer brand, has delayed the construction of its planned 10.5G OLED panel factory yet again. Okay, I don't know what that is. LG Display's 10.5G factory was originally announced back in 2017. At the time, they planned to manufacture both LCD and OLED panels, but they dropped the LCD side of things altogether, which delayed things until 2019. Seems like dropping things would make it faster, but apparently it made it slower.
Yeah.
Then
replanning,
COVID-19,
retooling. Yeah.
COVID-19 doesn't ring a bell.
Right.
Understandably caused more delays, and now they're saying the economics just aren't right, so plans have been pushed all the way back to 2028.
Yeah.
LG Displays clarified that the plant could potentially still be open before then at low capacity, since things are usually carried out in stages. But the upshot of all of it is we shouldn't expect any large decreases in OLED prices for the next several years, and the largest 83, 88, and 98-inch panels are going to remain significantly more expensive than the smaller screen sizes. How is that an upshot? That seems like a downshot.
I just use upshot as like the info.
No, the upshot means that the upside of it. At least in my head.
Uptick? Now we're just arguing semantics and word
now
choice.
We're arguing
that
semantics,
really doesn't
yes.
matter.
The point is that there's not going to be and I if you think about everything in the world that you pay money for, okay, TVs are like the one thing that keep relatively coming down in price compared to like everything. Like, how are TVs so inexpensive?
They're
like,
subsidized by all the ads they put on them. That's that's not a facetious answer. That is the truth. They should be more expensive than they are.
They are insanely cheap. Like, you can go, like, I walk through stores and I glance over at the prices and I am constantly shocked by how cheap things are. Like a 55-inch or 56-inch, whatever the plasma was my parents bought, was like $2,600 when they bought it.
Yeah.
You can get like a ridiculously more powerful TV for $2,600. Like, you can get like the best of the best, and that wasn't the best of the best at the time. There were still bigger, better TVs back then.
But that said,
crazy.
I still want my 98-inch OLED for around $5,000 or less at some point.
Sure.
Which, I mean, somebody might be saying, hey, that's asking for a bit much, but we have 98-inch LCDs for under $5,000 now. Once you get the plant, so this, like right now, they have two 8.5G plants that they're creating the panels at. The G stands for generation, but it, like, I don't know, it's a weird nomenclature that they use when it comes to factories like this for producing TV panels. So basically the larger number just means that the mother glass, as they call it, the original piece of glass from which all the individual panels are cut, gets larger and larger as that number goes up. So once you get to these 10.5 generation plants, you have mother glass so large that you can create like 4 85-inch televisions out of it instead of only be able to make like one 85-inch and then a bunch of 55-inchers. So that's where the economies of scale start coming in for the much larger screen sizes, because right now with those large sizes, they're basically getting one of those out of each 8.5G panel that they're creating right now, and then several other smaller screen sizes. That makes all the smaller screen sizes come down in price, but the large sizes, they stay way up in price. With those 98-inch panels they're making right now, there's basically a bunch of waste material because it isn't what's left over after making the 98-inch isn't big enough to make like any of their other standard screen sizes. So it's like one piece of mother glass is being cut to that 98-inch size and the rest is just waste. So that's why, it's up at $25,000, this gigantic price delta between the 83 and the 98. So I want to start getting, if you can start getting two full 98 inches out of one piece of mother glass, that starts to bring that economy of scale, way, way down. Right. So, a 98-inch OLED for $5,000 is not an insane thought. That could be doable. That's how we're getting those $5,000 LCDs, is with those 11G plants that they have for the LCD fabs now. But yeah, it's all going to be delayed. Don't expect to come in for basically the next 5 years. I'm disappointed at that, but that's the explanation.
All right. BenQ announced 4 new 4K DLP projector models. The TK860i, which is $1,800, is the brightest of the new models, rated at 3,300 ANSI lumens, but it can't quite reach 100% of even Rec 709 color, and it uses a traditional lamp. The HT3560, $1,700, a little bit cheaper, replaces the HT3550 that we've often recommended, 2,200 lumens, still lamp-based, 95% of DCI P3, and it gains BenQ HDR Pro processing with HDR10 Plus support. HDR Pro is still metadata-based tone mapping, but with over 1,000 zones of local contrast enhancement.
Yup.
What does that mean?
So dynamic contrast on your TV, right?
Yeah.
Which messes with the signal. It's algorithmically based. It just applies a curve to things. Well, dynamic contrast that we've had on all our traditional screens has been the entire screen. It goes over the entire screen at once. Now it's basically like dividing the screen up into over 1,000 individual areas.
But it's a projector. How much can it actually?
Well, it's still dynamic contrast.
Yeah. Okay, I get it.
So it's not local dimming or anything like that, but it's just they're dividing up the screen into 1,000 little different areas and applying dynamic contrast individually to each little screen. Yeah. But it's not dynamic tone mapping.
Okay, well.
Yeah.
HT3560.
We did that.
Is that the one? That's the one I just said. The HT4550i, which is $3,000, is an interesting new model that uses 4 LEDs as the light source, not lamps or lasers. Are they replaceable? That's the one I care about.
No.
Of course
LEDs.
Not. Yeah. 3,200 ANSI lumens and 100% of DCI P3. It has HDR Pro 2, of course.
Mm-hmm.
Well, 2 as well.
As well, yes.
Of course,
HDR Pro.
Not like a different version of it. And the V5000i, which is $3,500, is the ultra short throw model. It comes bundled with a 100-inch ultra short throw ambient light rejecting screen. For that price, it's using an RGB laser light source that they claim can reach 95% of Rec 2020 color and 2,500 lumens. This model is supposed to have 4K 120 support with low input lag. I don't love that we insist on putting ambient light rejecting screens with ultra short throw projectors. Like, they don't all go in living rooms. Some people just don't want to run a cable to the back of their room and still have light control. We don't all need ALR screens for our ultra short throw projectors.
I guess they're figuring if you're in a situation where you don't need an ALR screen, then
what are you going to do with the ALR screen?
Are you going to choose an ultra short throw? But I mean, for just the physical factor of it, I could definitely see people still picking that. There'll probably be a version of this that doesn't come bundled. They want to be able to sell this as a laser TV, like so many other ultra short throw projectors are being. I did want to mention, I didn't put it in the show notes, I just saw it like right before we started recording. Vincent Tio over at HDTV Test, he just put up a great comparison between a 100-inch high-end, like $7,000 ultra short throw projector right beside a 98-inch TCL. And he's like, here's the reason why a flat panel TV is still better. And like, as long as you can get very similar size for size and price for price.
Yeah.
He's like, yep, you have one little window way over in a back corner, no light hitting directly on the screen. It's like, whoop, there went your black levels, even on the ambient light rejecting screen. So it was a great comparison. I'll put a link for that in the show notes. But all the stuff I've been talking about, but haven't had great video examples to show you. Yeah, Vincent to the rescue, as he so often is. So I'll link that up. But yeah, this $3,500. There is this like red, green, blue laser light engine that's been used in quite a few projectors at that price point. It seems as though there was a Chinese company out there who sort of developed it, and a bunch of people were like, hey, that seems useful. So there's lots of different brands using that light engine, and the claims of 4K 120 in an ultra short throw projector. Have not seen that before. So if that's true, this will be one of the first to do that. I'm not exactly sure how they're doing it, because at this price point, it's clearly the 1080p 0.47-inch DLP chip that's being wobbled 4 times a frame already to get you to 4K 60. Could they be wobbling it 8 times a frame? It's not out of the question. That's possible, but I kind of wonder if that was just some misreporting where it's actually doing the 1080p 240 thing that is often done there. But I mean, it said right there in the press release that it 4K 120 support. Does that mean it's actually displaying it at 4K 120, or it just accepts the signal? There's all kinds of little bit of red flags in my head there, not least of which is just the price point. I'm like, are they really doing 8 shifts per frame? It seems a bit much, because I haven't seen that before. But we'll see. We'll see when it actually comes out. End of June, that one's supposed to be coming, or maybe July.
All right, we've got some comments here. Stan is an industrial hygienist. Yep. That sounds like somebody who really who like cleans murder scenes. But let's find out. And has been practicing his profession for 30 years. His job is to help control health hazards in the workplace, including performing noise surveys, implementing noise control programs, and providing training. Not nearly as many dead bodies as I expected. But here we go. He was quite concerned when he heard us talk about our listener who has experienced ringing in his ears after deadlifting workouts, so he wanted to provide some basic recommendations. The full subject of noise hazards and controlling them is too complex for just an email to us, but some points to consider. Yeah, first of all, I think we were very concerned as well.
Yes, we were.
I think we were all on the same page here.
Specific things about hearing protection, so this is worthwhile, I think. Yeah.
This is good. Any off-the-shelf hearing protection is really only meant for intermittent and relatively brief noise exposure. The simple rule of thumb is that if you feel like you need to speak up within 3 feet of another person because of the noise around you, then you probably need hearing protection. This guy is a huge amount of fun at parties. Just let me tell you, this guy right here is super popular walking around.
He ain't wrong.
I'm not saying he's wrong. I'm just saying that, yeah, I was just at a party this weekend and I had to speak up a bunch, but he's not wrong. NIOSH says
National
that
Institute of Safety and Health. Yeah. NIOSH.
No, there's no at the end. That's right.
Indeed.
Says that the weighted average over 8 hours should not exceed 85 dB. I think we've talked about that on the podcast before. iPhones have an app from NIOSH that is verified for monitoring the noise level of your environment, and they use an A-weighted scale with slow response. Any hearing protections you are buying should have an NRR, which is noise reduction rating. This is assigned by the EPA in the USA. If it doesn't have an NRR clearly marked, he'd be highly suspicious of any hearing protection claims. Specifically regarding having ring in your ears after every workout, he would want to make much stronger recommendation as he fears profound risk of hearing loss in a situation like that. And I think what I said was, you are now experiencing hearing loss. Yeah, we were on the same page. We do not have any technology or treatment that can fully restore permanent hearing loss. That is true. So the only good course of action is to protect the hearing you have. We tend to lose high-frequency hearing first. That can lead it to being difficult to distinguish between consonant sounds, making it difficult to understand what people are saying. But by the time any hearing loss is obvious, it means it's severe and it can never be fully restored, which is so true of many things in this world. By the time you know what's happening, it is way too late to do anything about it. This is why all these people, you're like, they were just fine and now they have stage 4 cancer. You're like, what happened in between? What happened in between? They didn't notice anything. Nothing.
Or they noticed a little bit but figured they could ignore it.
They ignored it, yeah. The best way to control the risk is to eliminate or at least reduce the source of the noise itself. So he seriously questions if the risk of the way of our AVRant listener is working... Let me try this sentence again. So he seriously questions if the risk of the way that our AVRant listener is working out is worth the obvious damage it is doing to his hearing. So the way he's working out is he's deadlifting and he's dropping his bar on top of
iron plates
instead of the mat, because I guess apparently because of how much he's lifting or whatever. Is there another way? Or can you bring your own mats or something that you don't mind getting destroyed by these things, so you deaden that. It won't help with anybody else who's doing the same thing.
Right. Yeah.
But it would help with you being the closest one to it. For example, I'm giving you an example that I literally just came up with off the top of my head. The NRR that he talked about is based on the attenuation of continuous noise, so it isn't necessarily an accurate indicator of how well it works for repeated, sudden, impact, and impulse noises. That makes it difficult to select hearing protection that he would feel confident in saying it will protect from this specific type of noise. Hearing protection can be highly variable, particularly when the fit might be changing due to the user moving around a lot, which of course would be the case with the deadlift.
It would, yes, when you're working out, yeah.
He was just talking to a medical professional. I mean, we're professionals at literally one thing. Where to put
I'm
your
not even a
speakers.
professional. I don't do this as a profession. I'm a hobbyist.
Yeah, I would say that you could still classify yourself as a professional, because you do.
Maybe self-proclaimed expert, but not a pro.
That's good. And he would suggest talking to a medical professional and likely having custom hearing protection fitted, or better yet, find a way to drastically reduce the source of the noise altogether. Is this noisy activity truly more important than your hearing for the rest of your life? Depending on the age of the person that you're talking to, that answer could very well be yes.
Sure.
Because young people don't... and I was one of them. I am not disparaging the young. I remember myself thinking, I'll be fine. And
But I do... very much like the idea, because you can get the mold of your ear is done. You get the custom earplugs that will not slip out when you're moving around, and you can have the medical professional at least consult with someone who really knows about this stuff and have that hearing protection that is going to actually be adequate for the amount of potentially very damaging noise that you're experiencing on a regular basis. So I'm in full agreement there, because it is, once your hearing is gone, it's gone. It's a real shame once it is. You regret it forever. I know that, just seeing plenty of people around me with hearing loss. So
if you saw pictures of me in high school and early college, you would be like, that guy goes to a lot of concerts. And that certainly should have been true, because I was into music and into all that stuff. But I didn't. I have been to less than a handful of concerts in my life, I think, total. And the really loud ones are, I think I can think of two that were quite loud. So I've been very fortunate in situationally not having damaged my hearing with those things. But I certainly should be somebody who's going a lot because of all the concerts I went to. Nathan was similarly concerned about the AVRant listener who wanted a much louder soundbar to overcome the noise of the bathtub jets in the bathroom setup. That sounds like a recipe for hearing damage. He suggested using noise-canceling headphones that have a good water resistance ratings. One aimed at running and workout often have good water resistance, so maybe consider those instead. Too late. You already bought it, but...
Indeed. Still quite reasonable advice. We agree on all of it.
Yeah. Jeremy wanted to confirm that the only way he was able to make a change on his Harmony remote recently was by using the Harmony app on his iPhone. The desktop software is kaput, but at least the app still seems to be getting updates. We also have to apologize for missing our chance to mention that Jeremy was at the Austin Records Convention on May 6th, demoing his Waterloo high-efficiency speakers from his company, JPorter Studios. He was hoping to say hi to some fellow AVRant listeners. Oh, they're blue. I only saw the top part. I was like, I don't see the speakers. I scrolled down. They're very blue. If you're not looking at the pictures, you should look at the pictures just for this, because it's a very blue speaker.
It's a fun one.
It's a cute looking speaker.
Yeah, it's fun.
It looks like it's on top of a couch.
I think that was like when it was still being put together or something like that.
Yeah, something's going on here. It's
just an example that you can have a look at what JPorter Studios is doing. These are not tiny. These aren't going on your bookshelf. These aren't being hidden in some little corner somewhere. These are front and center speakers that take up and demand your attention in the room.
Yeah, if you click on the link, it'll take you to the website, and you'll see more images, and they are not diminutive, and they are actually. I mean, like the waveguides are all like the plywood. And it's very attractive speakers. They're very nice.
Cool stuff.
They're not cheap, but they're high end. What are you gonna do? I have some questions. Brian would like to try a printed acoustic panel in their dining room. Their house is a fairly modern design with hardwood floors, so pretty much all hard reflective surfaces. The whole house is pretty darn echoey, but his wife is skeptical that acoustic panels will A, make a worthwhile difference, and B, look good. So this is a trial run, and hopefully something that will convince his wife. Now, first of all, you better just lower your expectations if you're going to put one panel up and think it's going to make a huge
that's his
difference.
very first question. Yes.
First and foremost, so we think that one large panel about 4.5 by 3 feet tall will make a noticeable difference sound-wise. Absolutely not. There's basically nothing else absorptive in their house. Absolutely not.
Well, there is a way. I'm going to mention a way to demonstrate that it is making a difference.
Some of the rooms really ring when you make any sound. Obviously, a single panel is going to perform miracles, but will even make a dent, something his wife will be able to notice and appreciate. Okay, so
in the overall
Rob is going to tell you.
Yes.
Rob is going to tell you to stand next to it and clap or something like that, right?
Well,
And but the second part is appreciate, and the answer is absolutely not. She's not going to appreciate it.
Well, I don't know. So
if she already hates it, if she already hates the idea, this is not going to convince her. But go on, Rob.
Yeah, the demonstration you can do is have her stand in front of the panel with the panel behind her. All right, so panel's on the wall. She's standing with her back to the wall with the panel behind her, and then you speak to her from several feet away with her in that position, then have her move over to the part of the bare wall beside the panel, and you stay in the same position and speak to her there, and let her hear the difference between having that immediate slap echo off the back wall directly behind her, the regular hard wall that you're used to, versus having the panel behind her. That is the easiest way in any given echoey room to very readily notice the difference of what an acoustic panel is doing. That would hopefully make it easier to explain then, okay, look, the sound is bouncing between all of these hard surfaces. So if we have panels in various places, that means we're getting that sound absorbed wherever there is a panel. Hopefully, with only one panel on hand, that's the best demonstration I can offer to you, because it's about the only one that is going to make a readily noticeable difference.
Yeah, and I don't even know how readily noticeable it's going to be. It should be readily noticeable. It should be.
Yeah.
She could also just stand close to a wall and clap, and then stand next to the panel and clap.
Oh, sure, that too. Yeah,
and that should.
But usually, it's people notice when it's easier to have a conversation, because for someone who doesn't care about the music audio quality or the TV audio quality, what they might care about is, it's a lot easier to talk to my friends now. That's why I think just speaking to someone and having them standing in front of a panel with the panel behind them and then comparing that to having the hard flat wall behind them is probably the best demo I can come up with.
I have a lot of suggestions, not for this part, but for what kind of panels you can get and how you can convince her that this is a good idea. I don't know when I'm supposed to say those things because I haven't read, and this is a multi-part question. So
this one was on the list from last week, so there was an opportunity you could have read.
I didn't read it.
I know you didn't.
I don't.
This is evident now.
This is... all you people are like, he's just pretending. No, I literally am talking. This is, if you were having dinner with me and you said this is the response that I would have gotten.
I'm pretty confident most, if not all, of what you're thinking already is going to be in the question, so you can address it there. Yes.
All right. So he's confident he has the DIY skills to make his own panels, but for this first printed art panel that has so much writing on it in terms of convincing his wife it'll be worthwhile to add more, should he just pay for a completed panel? Should he buy a custom art panel from GIK? Is anyone else's printing quality and quality of assembly better than GIK's? We don't know that we've had enough experience with everything else. Now, so the problem with getting acoustic panels from any place else is that they're gonna be very specific sizes, and even the size that you already mentioned, 4.5 by 3,
would be a custom size.
Would be a custom size,
which they can do.
They can.
Yes.
So, but if you are specifically wanting a panel like that, then yes, you should DIY it yourself. It's not. It's literally just wrapping fabric around the thing. So unless the panel, if you are getting a panel that is where it's very important that everything lines up properly as far as the printing on it. If it's got an image that needs, like a movie poster, for example, where if it's a little bit askew, it's gonna be obvious that it's a little bit askew. Then have somebody else do it so that you can complain about it if it doesn't come out right. But if it's just a color or some sort of nebulous, artsy looking something, and it doesn't have to be dead straight, and you want it to be a very specific size, or that that's going to fit in the spot where that she would want it to be, then you should DIY it. That's my opinion.
Yeah, so in terms of quality of assembly, that is actually somewhere where some people have a little bit of a nit to pick with GIKs, because it is hand assembled. It is not necessarily absolutely perfectly straight, clean edges every single place, but in terms of the printing quality, so GIK doesn't actually print. They dye. They use a sublimated dye process.
And that's the better way to do it.
And that is the better way to do it. So in terms of what the image ends up looking like on the fabric, I don't think anybody's really doing it better. Where you could get panels that are printed, look very nice, the quality of assembly is on par or maybe even a tick higher, would be Acoustimac. They are printing on their fabric. So I would say that the quality of the image on GIKs is a little tick higher, but if this is about, I'm not entirely sure, maybe you even go for just a standard size, maybe even one of the stock image that they already have, which lowers the price again. Like if this is all about, I don't even know if I'm going to be allowed to have any more panels than this, and I want to just control as much as I can in terms of keeping the budget reasonable, maybe just getting standard size stock image from Acoustimac, which would bring the price of all of an art panel that way considerably lower than going for custom size from GIK, which would definitely be more expensive. I think that might be an option. So my one concern with making your very first panel DIY is that very often people err on the side of not making it thick enough. And it would be beneficial. Where again, I prefer GIK is their panels are thicker in general, and they incorporate an air gap, which is beneficial both for the hanging and for the performance of it. So if you're able to afford it from GIK, I do highly recommend them. The print quality is top notch, or in fact dying, not printing. So there, hopefully that gives you the option. You can look into it and make that decision there.
So you heard us recommend Spoonflower in the past for printed acoustically transparent fabric. The intention would be to print images of their own photos, so there shouldn't be any copyright concerns in their case. Which of the fabrics is best to use, or is there some other printing service that would be even better?
So my fabric designs is gone. They don't seem to be around anymore, and that was our favorite alternative. Spoonflower, as long as there is no problem with copyright, they absolutely will print your own custom images on there. So that part would be fine going with Spoonflower. Now, they used to have two fabrics that we recommended all the time, one called Silky Fail and another called Performance Knit. Both of those fabrics are not used anymore, but they replaced the Performance Knit with one they're now calling Performance PK. I'm not exactly sure. I mean, just different supplier is what it came from, but Performance PK is very, very similar to what Performance Knit used to be. So that would be the obvious choice there. So I'll have a link directly to that particular fabric. It is stretchy in one direction. So when you're doing it yourself, you just have to be aware that, you don't want to stretch it too much in that direction, which would, of course, distort your image. So it's a little bit of carefulness is needed with the wrapping, but the acoustic transparency is very good. The print quality on it comes out very nice. So that is certainly an option.
Okay. Lastly, he's heard us mention in the past that you can get panels that perfectly match the color of your walls. How do you go about doing that? For example, if you have a paint color already in mind, do you just send a sample to GIK or some other panel maker, or do you send them RGB values or something? How would they be able to perfectly match the fabric color to your choice of paint color? I don't know that they can perfectly match it.
No. In fact, it would be the other direction. What you would do is find a fabric in their selection, because they have Guilford of Maine, which has a gigantic range of fabric colors. Yeah. So you find the fabric that you like, then you would take the fabric to your paint manufacturer, and they have the scanning technology. They would scan it and match.
They can do that at Lowe's and Home Depot and every place else too. It's not like you have to go to some custom place.
But it would be that direction. That's how you would get the perfect match if you wanted. You would get the fabric first and then have the paint match it.
Yes. So first of all, I think it's a terrible idea for you to put your own photos on there. Can I just start with that? And the reason is because you are going to have something to compare them to, and
I see. Yeah, it isn't going to look like the photograph. Right?
It's not going to look exactly the same. So if you look at my article, if you look at my article on the GIK acoustic panels, right? I kind of show this, like how do they look.
Right. The panel always looks duller than the poster or the photograph because there's no gloss to it. That would always be the case.
So you're gonna be missing some of that, and I think that's why you should not be doing that. I think that's setting yourself up for failure. I also don't think you should be trying to perfectly match the color of your walls because, like Rob said, first of all, it's the wrong direction.
The sheen is probably not going to match.
Yeah.
Unless you go with very flat matte paint.
What you want is the panel to just stand on its own. Okay, so if I were you, I would do one of two things. There's a website called Pixabay, I think that's what it's called. Let me look it up real quick. And Pixabay, what they do is, I think they ask you to use, I mean, you don't have to actually do this, but ask you to upload like 5 of your own pictures of whatever. It doesn't have to be anything. I think when I joined, I uploaded 5 pictures that I just had on my phone of food I had taken pictures of, and then upload to Facebook. So I was a member of a group of foodies that I was doing stuff like that. So I don't do that anymore. But I uploaded the 5 photos, and that was it. And I got full access to their entire library of high quality or high res images that you could use to do whatever the heck you want with. And I use them on AV gadgets all the time, free, royalty free, copyright free. You can do whatever you want with them. It's free. Okay, so there you have a huge repository of images that you can choose, and they've got everything from realistic stuff and lots of photos to art that people have created and want to do that with. So you go on there and you find something that your wife likes or that you both like or you think will go with your or better yet, go to one of these many AI image generator programs that are out there and just AI generate something until you find something you like.
All of the panel manufacturers who do printing, they have a whole huge selection of stock images that they already know work nicely on their panels. Yeah. So it's almost a bit curated for you. So that's a great way to go as well. I also want to say one thing I really like is just having patterned fabric as your choice, because that way it's like an accent on your wall. It works as decoration, but it doesn't have to be like comparison to a real life image, and it doesn't have to be like, oh, has to be the exact perfect matching of color and sheen. It's just like, no, it's a pattern on your wall and it looks really nice. So I think that's a good option too, and that keeps the price down, because over at Acoustimac you can just get patterned panels.
So I would do something along those lines. That way I like the idea of getting your wife involved in the picture choosing. Don't choose something that you can directly compare to something else, because that comparison is never going to work in your favor, I think. And then instead get something that's unique that will allow you to say, hey, look how good this looks in this room. Or, something along those lines. And if it doesn't work out, it doesn't work out. But I totally understand wanting to do this. And
for sure.
But I think that to set yourself up for success, you need to have the panel not be something that is familiar or that you can compare to something else, because it's not going to help you out with this situation. All right. Dan, first up, all of Dan's questions here might sound a bit confrontational, but that is not the intention. He just wants to learn and get a better understanding. And one of the main reasons he listens to our podcast is because we don't just parrot the same words as a lot of other audio publications and reviewers, but it isn't possible to fully understand anything without asking whatever. I'm going to script all that. Why do we seem to say the term audiophile with derision or seemingly want to discredit so-called audiophiles? Tom and Rob love the gear and the content, and we both clearly love many aspects of audio. Does not make us audiophiles. That's the meaning of the word, right? Maybe stated another way, if calling someone a videophile doesn't seem to carry the same negative connotations, so what's up with that? Audiophiles act like a-holes. There you go.
And obviously, yes, not all. There are audiophiles who are very reasonable, very nice people. We have friends that absolutely fit that bill. But yeah, there's it's tricky. I mean,
I'm a middle class white male. Guess what? I don't like to be referred to in that way because it's got a little negative connotation going along with it these days. And rightly so, because many of my compatriots and the people I went to high school with are a bunch of a-holes. All right?
Yeah.
Same thing with audiophiles.
I agree with Dan. It's a shame because, yes, the meaning of the word is just somebody who loves audio. Yes, absolutely. I love audio. We fit that bill. There's been a twisting, like there so often, many terms, right, got twisted from what the word literally means. And it's just because, for whatever reason, there's a group that is broadly referred to as audiophiles that insist on holding to ideas that are just factually, demonstrably untrue, or give advice that is just really bad advice. Like it's just about the group that unfortunately that word now applies to. It's not every single individual, and the meaning of the word itself has been taken and twisted into something that the words don't actually mean. So I think we're more in agreement with you there than anything. But if you're like, I consider myself an audiophile, I love audio, I'm into it, it's part of my hobby and my community. I don't necessarily get into every little, scientific number crunching type of thing. I just want to enjoy what I'm listening to. And so I find myself more in I consider art, music reproduction and art more than a science, whatever that is. Like, that's all fine. That's all good. And we don't dispute any of that. There is the other group that is part, unfortunately, of just the term audiophile.
They've co-opted it.
There you go. That's exactly it. Yep, that's it.
And you can blame stereophile as far as I'm concerned. Sure. Not directly, but that sort of publication, that publication and those types of publications have continued to push, audiophiles to the side of like, you have to have all these special cables and these weird amps and these other things,
and where we
all consumer level gear, like the guy who took his Denon to the
Right. That's right.
thing.
Yeah.
You know,
you can't buy
all your gear's
any
crap.
modern AV receiver. They're all junk. They're all going to die on you. Every single one of them out there has. Don't we have the examples of every AV receiver that's ever been bought in the past 10 years? Every single one of them has failed.
Everyone. Mine failed 3 times today.
Right.
It's the same thing with road cyclists. Like those the road cyclists. It is a dirty word for most people.
Sure,
don't call me like in Florida, you don't want to be called a cyclist at all, right?
Sure.
But you definitely don't want to be called a road cyclist because those people are insane. They spend tens of thousands of dollars on bikes.
Like, what do the words literally mean? It doesn't have all of that in what
doesn't
the
have
words
all of that.
road cyclist mean, but
doesn't have all of that.
Comes
but
with
believe
it now.
me, I hang out with them and I'm like, did you just say titanium bottle cage?
Sure.
I mean, the thing that holds the bottle on there, you bought a titanium one of those.
Maybe it's a bit
Why?
lighter.
It is a bit lighter. They're like, it's because it's lighter. I'm like, you think that's what's keeping you from going fast?
Sure it is. Clearly. But why doesn't the term videophile have the same negative connotation as audiophile? I mean, I think a lot of that just goes to the fact that in video, we have actual measurable standards.
Yeah.
And I know Harman's doing a ton of work to try and create such standards in audio, but they still don't actually exist for the most part.
Exist.
Whereas video, it's quite easy to say, no, look, these are the industry standard numbers. There's no dispute about it. There's no argument about it. There's no debate about it. There's no having to try and figure out whether they're true or accurate or anything. No, they just exist. They're completely widely recognized. And if you're a videophile who says, well, what I want to do is calibrate every display I have to match exactly those figures, like there's not really any debate to be had in that. So
no one goes around saying I prefer my TVs to be more blue. You know,
well, I mean, some people do, which is fine if that's their preference.
Yeah, but everybody else is like, well, that's just not
videophile.
accurate. I know it's not accurate. But I just like it. Mm-hmm. Right? No one says that on the audio side of things. I know it's not accurate. I just like it. They say, no, this is what's best.
Some people do, but
no, they don't.
Anyway, let's move on. We got a ton to play catch up on, so I think
he watched a video that briefly explained jitter in digital audio. He sort of say how modern DACs basically render this a non-issue, but he still sees a lot of people online concerned about it and claim it's a big issue. Why is that? Because it makes money, I think, somehow through clicks.
Never let it go. Never let it go. Yeah.
It's a non-issue. It's the same thing with people saying things online about how Denons are analytical and Yamahas are warm or whatever the freaking I can't remember what it was. Once they get a hold of something, they're like, this knowledge is in my brain and it's never ever leaving.
And they find other people who parrot the same thing, so that gives them confirmation, quote unquote, that they're right about that. Yeah, it's a weird one to still be. I mean, I guess, it's going hand in hand with the so-called vinyl resurgence, which isn't really a resurgence whatsoever, but anyway, it goes all hand in hand with that. The people like analog only, reel-to-reel tape only, even vinyl is crap. They're like, well, this here's my reason for why you can never have digital audio. It's the jitter. It's the one thing you can actually point at and demonstrate on an oscilloscope if you really, really want to find it. Yes, it still exists. But the explanation, the video they showed, it's a fellow, I've seen other videos of his. For the most part, it was okay. It was very much generalized. It was very much, layman's terms explaining what was going on. The explanation of jitter wasn't terrible. That was okay, even though it wasn't really, terribly technical. But then he went on this weird diatribe at the end about how our ears are so much more sensitive than any measurement equipment like the Audio Precision that he owns himself and stuff. I was like, okay, so you just decided to go off the deep end at the end of your video because nothing he said in the last 5 minutes was true in the least. That was all just coming from audiophile. I can hear stuff that can't be confirmed in any other way. I just believe that I hear it.
I believe it.
And worked his way backwards into some true information. So that was all a bit weird. So what I'm going to do is, once again, point you over to ziff.org. 2 videos that wonderfully explain how digital audio actually works, how DACs actually function, why this isn't a problem anymore. That's where you should get your information there.
Oh, right. Okay. So when it comes to disc players, CDs, DVDs, Blu-rays, etc., we seem to claim that, other than the occasional setting differences or quick interface quirks, they basically all perform the same, and you can understand that if all they did was read what's on the given disc and send out exactly how it is. But many players have functions above and beyond that, which we all recommend to turn off. But let's go on.
Yeah.
He can't quite get his head around not drawing a distinction between standard disc players and high-quality disc players. He's seen and heard the differences. My audiophile friend. Yeah, you didn't turn the stuff off. Yeah, it should be bit streamed out and let your receiver do it. And if everything was... Okay, the decoders are all the same. There is... I mean... There is no difference between one decoder versus another decoder. The only difference is what happens to it after it's decoded.
Sure.
And if something is doing something after the decoding, that should be your AV receiver, which you should be doing bass management and your room correction stuff. But nothing else. Nothing else, really.
Right.
Up conversion, maybe, if you're... I'm not an up conversion, but, DSP up mixing, if you're going to add more, use more of the speakers than were originally in the mix. That's about it. All things being equal, the players are identical. The only thing that makes them different is when somebody does something that they're not supposed to be doing. And that can either be disabled by you or enabled by you. So if you heard a difference, usually the only thing I can think of that it's volume. That would be the only difference. Is that one thing.
Certainly there are, like, if you're so this is on the audio side of disc players.
Right.
If you are using the analog outputs and there is whatever going on, so not just the digital analog conversion, but maybe there is some filtering being applied, maybe there's some EQ being applied, maybe there's some preamplification being applied. There's many things that the player could be doing when it is doing the digital analog conversion itself and then doing whatever it does to the analog signal either before or after the digital analog conversion. Yeah, there's absolutely ways you can very legitimately make the sound different if you want to. So on the audio side of discs, our approach is, we do just want a disc transport. We just want, if it is an encoded format like Dolby Digital or something like that, either just send the bit stream straight out of the player via an optical connection or HDMI connection, let whatever preamplifier or receiver that you're connecting it to handle the decoding and all of that other stuff. Just take the bits off the disc, stream it out of the player. That's what we want our disc players to do. That's our approach to it, because we don't want the player messing with it in a way that we don't fully understand. Just give me what's on the disc. Or if it's something like PCM, where there is no encoding involved, just stream the bits straight off the disc into whatever preamplifier or receiver I'm using. So on the audio side of things, that's where we're saying, it doesn't make a difference if you're just keeping the signal digital. You're not even doing any decoding inside of the player. Just what's on the disc, we're shooting it out of the player. Where I would actually take a little bit of umbrage with this claim is I'm not saying every disc player, particularly on the video side, is equal. And I would go with that's a little bit beyond just settings differences or interface quirks,
for
example.
That is true, because you have the...
like the Panasonics,
the player LED versus...
Or TV LED, Dolby Vision. Sure. There's that side of it too. So I mean, like with the Panasonic Ultra HD Blu-ray players, I'm actually advising in some cases, hey, do a thing that is not just sending the bits off the disc out of the player directly. Use that HDR optimizer in the places where it makes sense. The player is definitely changing the video signal when you do that. No question about it. In a way that other brands of Ultra HD Blu-ray players don't do. It's unique to Panasonic, who does that. And it isn't even every single model that they make. It's the ones that have their HDR optimizer. That's a very obvious change it's making to the video. So I'm not saying all players are equal on the video side there. That's a perfect example where that's beyond just a settings difference. That's a full out feature that is unique to one brand and only some players of that brand. But on the audio side, we just want it to be a transport. Just what's on the disc, shoot it out of the player.
Right. Most commonly, we will talk about the video side of it when we're looking at projectors, because of the whole doesn't have Dolby Vision, all of that. But it does occasionally come up with flat panels as well.
Sure, absolutely.
On the video side. But on the audio side, I mean, it's just not the case anymore that people are using analog outputs, except if they're audio files.
Some audio files are, exactly. But at that point, you're using the player as both a player and a preamplifier of some kind. It's performing more functions than just being a player.
That's right. So we've obviously discussed power amps many times on the podcast, but similar to his last question about disc players, he understands that if every amp in the world just did its job it is supposed to do, and you don't push it beyond its limits, then they ought to all sound exactly the same. But when he has owned many different power amps, and he's clearly heard differences between them, so other than purely amplify the signal, what else is going on? Well, I've talked about clearly hearing the difference between amplifiers too. When I compared an AB amp to essentially an ICE amp, a digital amp,
Sure.
I heard differences, and the differences were not subtle. I thought weren't subtle, and I mean they weren't so obvious that the rest of my family noticed them, but they also weren't listening critically like I was. They're just watching TV. So yes, there is some amount of EQ, passive, I would call EQ, that is going on when when an amplifier is having problems or sending a non-linear signal to the speakers because of impedance differences, or
that's
because
very often what does it. Our speakers, while we might see something like a nominal 8 ohm rating or a nominal 4 ohm rating, if you actually look at what is the electrical impedance of that speaker across the entire range of audible frequencies, it is squiggling all over the place. It's all up and down as far as what the impedance actually is
on all the graphs.
It is a bit tough because when we tend to see measurements of power amplifiers, that is not typically an actual like realistic load. It's like a constant 8 ohm load or a constant 4 ohm load across all frequencies, because that is the only way you can make a reasonable measurement, because otherwise you're introducing multiple variables. We're trying to limit the variables when we're measuring. So we're saying, well, one of the variables we're going to eliminate in the measurement that does exist in real life is variable impedance based on what frequency we're measuring. We're gonna level that playing field and see what this amplifier does when it's played into a steady impedance at all times across all frequencies, which isn't really necessarily a realistic use case. So it can absolutely be the case that depending on the design of the amplifier, when that impedance is swinging wildly like it does with some speakers, it is no longer linear. It's no longer doing what an amplifier ideally would do. Ideally, if we had an absolutely ideal amplifier, it wouldn't matter. You could vary the impedance and it would just remain perfectly linear, and all it would do is make the amplitude higher of the signal. But that isn't the real world. In the real world, there are these interactions, particularly between the impedance of the speaker, which is swinging all over the place a lot of times. So can there be audible differences between amplifiers? Yes, there can. There can be audible differences. What is difficult from the pure audiophile side of things, where you're not doing a scientifically rigorous comparison, you're just using music that you like to listen to different things and saying, I hear it. It's very difficult to then drill down and nail down, well, what is actually going on? What's causing that difference? It isn't magic, okay? It's never magic. It's never, this amplifier does something that other amplifiers just don't do. No, there is an explanation for exactly why that's happening. We're not saying there can't ever be a difference, but what we will say is very often the difference is purely psychoacoustic, that once you actually get into a scientifically rigorous study, even when what you're listening to in controlled circumstances is music and not test tones, suddenly it becomes much more difficult for people to reliably tell those differences that they thought were night and day. So very often it's psychoacoustic. But when it is, because it isn't always psychoacoustic, when it isn't, there is an explanation, and we can drive down to it. When we get to amplifiers that are really well designed, like the monolith amplifiers, ATI's amplifiers, Emotiva's amplifiers, all of those, then the claims that you're going to be hearing these wild differences between them and some $70,000 amplifier, I'm more likely to be inclined to think that the $70,000 amplifier is the one that's becoming nonlinear. And maybe you like what it's doing on a particular song, but the measurements on these very well-established amplifiers that we recommend, it's like, no, they are almost load invariant. They are really stable. And the Anthem amplifiers fit that bill too. So, and they're not the most expensive ones, which is why we like them. We're like, hey, doesn't matter what you're driving. They do their job about as well as an amplifier can do. They're not going to be the problem or the weird variable that we can't account for. We like that, and we like it even more that you don't have to pay the most expensive price to get them. They're not cheap, though.
So when it comes to TVs, projectors, speakers, unlike DACs, amps, and disc players, we don't seem to have any problem pointing out performance differences and talking about where one model has advantages and disadvantages versus another. But ideally, shouldn't these types of devices all perform identically? And since there doesn't seem to be any disagreement anywhere that they do not all perform identically, why doesn't that same line, I think, apply to power amps and DACs? We already explained that second part. TVs, projectors, and speakers. Speakers are very room dependent. I mean, you could make the same argument about TVs and projectors.
I would even argue with speakers, they aren't all meant to perform identically.
Yeah.
Because when it comes to particularly something like dispersion, there is no right or wrong. You can create a narrow dispersion speaker that is absolutely appropriate for a given circumstance, and then an exceedingly wide dispersion speaker that's great for a different circumstance. Right. And there is no, they should all be identical in the dispersion of the speaker. There's no right or wrong there.
Well, and as far as TVs and projectors and other displays, you're like, shouldn't they all perform identically? Yes, they should.
Ideally. Yeah,
ideally, they should all have infinite contrast and hit 1,000 nits or 2,000 or 5,000 or 10,000
now.
nits.
The signals go up to 10,000 nits, so ideally every single one of them would.
All of them have a price point to hit, and they have technical limitations that they run into, so they have to make compromises someplace.
Yeah,
and that's where you run into like your price. Like, why can't every car go 500 miles per hour? Sure. Well, they all could. If you spent enough money putting a big enough engine in them and all the other stuff all the other requirements, beefing up the frame and everything else that would be required to get them there, but you would have to spend all that money. You're like, I don't want to spend all that money. Well, your car doesn't get to go 500 miles an hour anymore. Same thing with TVs and projectors. They should all hit 10,000 nits. They should all have infinite contrast. They should all have,
perfectly accurate colors. They measure exactly where they should on the diagram. I mean, this is the reason why with displays, like I mentioned at the beginning of all these questions, it's so easy to say, well, not only do we know whether this TV is truly accurate to the signal, we know exactly how much it's away from perfection. Like, there's no ambiguity when it comes to displays. So with displays, I mean, you've actually hit upon the flip side of it, which is none of the consumer displays are perfect. And since none of them are perfect, and they're all slightly imperfect in slightly different ways, we can very easily point to, well, what are the differences, right? You take a Sony OLED and an LG OLED, both of which the original panel was manufactured by LG Display, but then you have LG Electronics and Sony Electronics who put it in a consumer package and sold it to you. And there are these minuscule little differences, but we can point to exactly the numbers between those differences and be like, well, in this aspect, the LG Electronics one came out ever so slightly closer in this one facet, and the Sony came out ever so slightly closer in this other facet. And we can debate those things, to no end about which one you prefer, but both of them are compromised in some way, and it's easy to identify when it comes to display. So that's why there isn't this disagreement like there is in audio, because again, going back to audio, we don't have the same very specific standards.
Yes, I am trying to change this, and it's not changing it, and I don't know why. All right, there. Next he asks... Yeah, whatever. I already forgot what that question was. What do we think about Samsung's QD OLED panels, and specifically about Sony jumping on board and using Samsung's panels as their flagship TV technology, while also keeping OLED panels from LG in the Sony lineup, but as their second-tier TV models, so to speak? Sony did not jump on board with LG's micro lens array OLED panels this year. Do we think that Sony might have made a mistake? The fears about burn on Samsung's QD OLED panels have Dan a bit worried. I
mean, don't watch, CNN and nothing else with the brightness turned up as high as it possibly can be for 22 hours a day or 20 hours a day or 18 hours a day or whatever it is Artings is doing. I mean, I appreciate what Artings is doing. There isn't really another way to do it because it's literally just trying to use these TVs as quickly as possible for as much time as possible. There's no other way around it. I appreciate what they're doing, but it isn't a realistic use case scenario. I mean, I guess somebody out there is doing that where they keep it on one channel for an inordinate number of hours a day and have the brightness cranked as high as it can possibly go. That is the fastest way to age your TV. But honestly, if you're varying your content, even if you were using it 14, 16 hours a day, it's fine. If you're varying the content, not maxing out the brightness, allowing it to do its compensation cycles, I don't even have a worry about burn-in on QD OLEDs. I think they're perfectly fine. So I wouldn't let that worry you. Sony made a choice, right? They are not the original panel manufacturer. They aren't associated with, Samsung Display that is manufacturing the QD OLED panels, or LG Display that is manufacturing their WOLED panels. They're having to buy those panels from somebody else who's physically manufacturing them. So they've made business decisions. I don't know how readily available and affordable those micro lens array panels from LG were this year. Maybe in the timeline, because these things are planned 3 years in advance, that type of thing. It's not like they can just say, oh, hey, turns out this one better than we expected it to be, so hey, let's flip everything on a dime, and this year we're going to reprioritize what we do in our TV lineup. Timelines just don't work that way. So they made a decision 2-3 years ago at least about what they were going to pursue for 2023's model lineup. I don't think they made a mistake. I don't think this is going to drastically change Sony's positioning in the TV market. Most people aren't looking at either of those TVs. They're at the top end of the price bracket. So yeah, I don't think they made a mistake whatsoever. If you just really like Sony as a brand and you want to get their QD OLED because that's the top of the line, I wouldn't worry one little bit about it. Just don't watch it for 20 hours a day, full brightness on CNN and nothing but.
Yeah. You might want to check your capture because I just got a pillow to sit on because my
sure. No, you're fine. You were a little bit low anyway, so now you're
my office chair has been
right
killing me, and now I'm on this chair and I'm in pain. This is like a painful experience right now. So I went and grabbed a cushion to try to make it through the next however many freaking hours we got left on this thing. So he asks, lastly, finally, what do we think about ISO Acoustics and their speaker and subwoofer decoupling products? I had to fix the link because it was not. It was going to something dead.
Oh, okay.
But I fixed it, I think. He heard a demo at Worldwide Stereo and came away very impressed. He noticed their Gaia speaker feet look very similar to SVS's sound path isolation feet, but at a higher price with more attachment point options. Why don't speaker and subwoofer manufacturers simply include isolation feet or platforms with every product? Why does SVS only include them with their cylinder subs and make you pay extra for their box subwoofer models? I mean, I don't know. I don't know why they do that. We could ask them. I think the answer is because they I think for the cylinder subs, it just makes sense to put them down there.
They had to put some fairly tall feet anyway. They're like, we already have these ones, so it's almost like a bonus that's thrown in there. I would say, why don't other speaker and subwoofer manufacturers do it? A lot of customers don't want it.
Yeah,
even though
they value it.
Well, they even literally don't want it at all because they're still in the I want spikes camp. There's lots of people who still want spikes on the bottom of their speakers or the bottom of their subwoofers, and so you'd have to go through a whole rigmarole of explaining why these big fat rubber feet are superior instead of beautiful pointy spikes that dig into their carpet. So I think there's a marketing reason that can't be fully ignored. That's partially behind the decision there, but also just price. These things do cost a bit. The isolation feet cost a bit more than some spikes. But I mean, a lot of speakers and subwoofers do include some rubber feet that come with it, rubber bumpers or something like that. So
they have a lot of times they'll have like some sort of plastic or rubbery spiked feet. They're not really spikes, but they're like a cone. Let's call them cones. Coned feet, which are not enough. They're not. They don't decouple enough. They do. I mean, they do not nothing. But
they're still better than completely hard metal spikes, in my opinion.
Yeah, they're going to be better than that, but not. It's not.
But as far as ISO Acoustics goes, I don't really have any problem with any other products. I think they're a little overpriced in terms of like for what they do, it does not require you spending as much money as they charge to do the function that they provide. You could use some mouse pads. You could use some packing foam, like anything that is squishy enough to be a cushion, but not so squishy that it compresses fully. Anything that fits that bill could do this. So you can use all kinds of different scrap material, or plenty of things that fall somewhere in between.
If you told me I like these stand thingies for the bookshelf speakers or the mounts or whatever they called or whatever, they're more expensive, but I like the way they look, I'd be like, okay, that's fine. I don't care what you put underneath there.
If the reason you're getting it is because you like the looks. Now, some of them, like some of their center speaker stands and stuff, I look at it and go, like, if that's the look you like, great, more power to you. Feel free. I personally think some of them are a little bit ugly, so I wouldn't want to pay that much and have a thing that I don't find particularly aesthetically pleasing. Because, like I say, it's not as though ISO Acoustics is doing something no other material, no other brand can do. There is certainly nothing like that. They've chosen a thing that I value. I absolutely value damping and decoupling all of your speakers and subwoofers. We're one of the few places that are saying, A, don't use spikes. B, your speakers that are sitting on a shelf or a TV stand or something like that, put something squishy under them. Don't just put it directly on the stand. Have something that's some kind of a shock absorber. The Isoacoustic products do that wonderfully. They perform their function very well if you love them for their looks and you don't mind the price that I think is a little bit high, but whatever. You're free. I
mean, they're clearly marketed back at Audiophiles, and you can see that. Sure. They're like their sub thingy, which is basically 4 attached the sound path isolation feet that are attached. They are sitting on top of a little platform, each one of the pucks or each one of the feet, instead of just the squishy part going on the ground. The squishy part goes on top of a little platform that is got carpet spikes in it. Why?
Okay.
Why? Why do you think? Because the audiophiles want it.
Sure,
basically.
You still got your spikes.
Yeah.
You're just separating from the spikes to the speaker.
Clearly, they're marketing at the audiophile market, and that's fine. I don't really care. And if you want to pay more for it because you think it looks cool, that's fine. It's just not going to... It's one of... Again... It's amazing to me how much people will spend on products that absolutely are no different or better than anything else, but they'll oh yeah, it works way better.
Branding works, Tom. Branding works. Tylenol's better than acetaminophen, right?
It really feels like every hobby is like this. Somebody told me the other day, there's 3 people you can sell anything to: golfers, fishermen, and cyclists. You can sell anything to them as long as you tell them it will give them a little bit of performance benefit, no matter how little it is.
So maybe vinyl fans fit in there too, huh?
They probably do. Yeah. Galen. This is an update from Galen and his wife. He wrote us about his new Roku Ultra that was having a weird problem, specifically with Amazon Prime Video. The image was only showing up in the top corner of the screen until he cycled the power, and even that didn't work every time, but their old Roku was fine. We said there really isn't anything to do besides wait for an app or a software update. Well, his Roku updated to a new Roku OS build, and no more problems. So he's just curious.
I mean, yay.
Yeah. We fixed it.
We were quickly proven right. Hooray.
Well, that'll be $200.
Sure.
He asks, is there a page that lists all the bug fixes that come along with a firmware update? He's just curious to see what it might have been. I honestly believe that that this was not a widespread problem where we would have heard more about it. But
I don't know. Yeah.
I mean, yeah. So there are always developer notes someplace.
Yeah. There's developer.roku.com, and they have a change log, release notes for all of their OS updates. Now, I read through the most recent one. There isn't something that immediately jumped out to me as like specifically what it might have been, but they mentioned they made a change to their API. They made a change to what the developers are using to put their apps onto the Roku OS. So could there have been something in there where Amazon, either it's something they didn't update and the API change in the Roku OS fixed it, or maybe Amazon was actually, they knew this release was coming and they were ahead of it and they were waiting for this to come out so that their new programming worked. It could be something like that. So it wasn't quite as obvious as saying, this is the reason Amazon Prime doesn't have this weird video glitch anymore. But there were changes made. They're in the release notes, and we'll just have the link.
I would be willing to bet that
Roku.com.
if you had the ability to reflash the firmware from before, that it would have fixed it too.
Yeah,
that there was just something. There was just something.
We don't know for sure that there wasn't also an app update to Amazon Prime Video itself in the back. Like I say, they don't make it obvious when the app itself did an update in the background, so it isn't. It might have been coincidental with the Roku OS updating. Maybe there was an app update specifically for Prime Video at the same time. We don't know if that was the case.
Very well be that like your last Roku OS, and it had like a too old version of the Amazon Prime app on it, and that's what was causing the problem. So when you updated the Roku OS, it went out and checked to see if anything else needed to be updated and updated all those things too. Yeah. It could be a bajillion things, honestly.
Sure.
So let's just sacrifice a goat to the audio gods and call it good. Jay has a Denon S760H receiver. It tops out 7 speakers. He's currently using 5.1 with Yamo Studio Series speakers all around. In his living situation, there's absolutely no way to install any speakers on the ceiling, and he really doesn't want to try to mount any speakers to the ceiling itself or way up high on any walls. So if he wants to try Atmos, it would have to be a 5.1.2 configuration using upward firing Atmos modules. His Yamo towers actually have proprietary connections on top for Yamo's own Atmos modules, but he's heard it mentioned that PSP's Atmos modules are probably the best.
By me? I mentioned that.
As far as upward firing speakers go, and then there are many other Atmos module options, from an inexpensive one like Sony's to Klipsch ones, which we seem to like. I think they're all fine, but whatever. What should he get, or specifically for movies, would expanding to a 7.1 setup actually be better than expanding to a 5.1.2? I do not think so. I think that you should try the 5.1.2. And I think that you should not be tied to attaching them to your front speakers. I've talked about this many times before. Placement of Atmos upward firing modules is of paramount importance. Like even more so than placing, I think other speakers are far more forgiving and in proper placement than the upward firing modules are. And I will link up an article that I wrote about this. And the idea here is that it's when the reflected sound reaches your ear compared to the direct sound. And when those two things are matched, people go, this sounds pretty good. And when it's not set up properly, you're like, this thing doesn't work at all.
Yeah.
So I would say you need to be very flexible with where you're going to set these up, and not just at the front of your room. You may find that they sound better coming from the sides of your room, where your surround speakers
top middles would have been type of thing.
So.
Yeah, which is an option. You can absolutely set things up that way with the receiver you have. I'm a little torn on this. I would say whether 7.1 makes sense depends very much on the distance from the back of your seat to where your wall is, because if your seats are fairly close to your back wall, I wouldn't recommend doing surround backs.
Yeah.
If you have an exceedingly large distance from you to the back wall, I probably wouldn't do surround backs there either. It's when you're in that nice sort of butter zone of, honestly, like 7 to 8 feet is where surround backs tend to sort of make the very best enhancements. If you're considerably closer or farther than that from your back wall, I wouldn't necessarily recommend you go with surround backs. Trying out, because this is more like a trial, right? He doesn't necessarily want to be fully committed to this, so it's tough. I kind of agree. I don't like the proprietary, you have to use our Atmos modules and they can only go exactly here. I don't like that Yamo did that. I think it's a bit of a shame that that's the way they decided to do it. I'm not always a fan of the speakers that come with the upward firing part of it built right into the speaker, because just like Tom said, it doesn't give you the flexibility to play with the placement of that whatsoever. So I would maybe suggest go with because there's two different upward firing Atmos modules in Klipsch's lineup. There's one in the Reference series and one in the more expensive Reference Premier series. I would say maybe, because you can get the Reference series ones from like a Best Buy or Amazon, where you can quite easily return it. And I don't feel too bad about returning a product like that to gigantic companies like that. They'll survive one pair of speakers coming back. So I think those are good enough to give you a reasonable trial. They give you the freedom to play with the placement to get the best experience that upward firing modules can. Those speakers also give you the option of, hey, it turns out, I could mount them high on my side walls. Well, you can use them that way. They're not upward firing only. So I think that sort of checks all the boxes of not too crazy expensive, easy to return if it turns out you don't want to use them, but good enough to give you a fair demo where you're giving them a fair shake. So the Reference Series Klipsch's is what I would recommend to you.
I'm just looking through this ISO Acoustics website and
still on that.
Dying a little inside. Jared comes to us with a request for a rant. He lives within 2 miles of a Crutchfield showroom. I did not know those existed, but now I do.
Oh, yeah.
They have a demo room that includes a false wall up front and a single set of speakers built into the actual wall behind the fabric. There's a TV mounted on the wall, and you can cycle through different speakers to compare how they sound. But why all the air quotes? Because it's different in the compare. Because the speakers aren't actually ever changing. It's always the same set of in-wall speakers playing, but Crutchfield is using their SpeakerCompare. That is one word, by the way, SpeakerCompare. Yes. Patented virtual audio. That's in quotes, technology to simply apply EQ and processing. He couldn't believe that a place like Crutchfield would set up something like that. Are they saying that speakers you buy and use don't actually matter and you can just mimic any speaker from any other speaker using EQ and filtering? Or is this whole setup a scam? They also have their SpeakerCompare on their website telling you to use a pair of headphones. They've profiled a selection so you can use any model of headphones from their list, apparently, to listen to different speakers online. Of course, Jared has seen the people on YouTube telling you to listen on headphones to their videos so that you can demo which speakers you like. What do we have to say about all this? All right, so let's just talk about it from a technical standpoint. If you put speakers in a room, just pick a room. It doesn't make any difference what it is. And you put up a good measurement microphone and you measure the response of the speaker in that room. Can you mimic from that one position the sound of those, the experience of being in that room with those speakers with headphones or something like that?
Having profiled the headphones so that you know the native response of the headphones.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, I would say that you could get pretty close. I mean,
to some extent you can. Yeah,
I would say that you could EQ that. So as far as that part of it is concerned. Now, let's talk about this room that they're in, right? The idea here would be that they would take and in this room put each one or in a room of these dimensions with, like, if it was standardized across all their little their showrooms or whatever. Like, we build this room, it's got these dimensions and these things on the wall, and this is where the furniture goes, and this is the exact furniture, and this is everything else. Then you could again do something similar. Are they doing that? There is no world in which I think they are. I think they're taking their SpeakerCompare thing and they're throwing it up there, and it's just giving you sort of an idea. How accurate is it? 0, I would say.
I mean, in a way, I would say more accurate than the YouTube videos. Because the YouTube videos haven't profiled anything.
No,
they don't know what headphones they're using. They have no idea what, like, the idea that you can just watch a bunch of YouTube videos of someone who put a mic in front of a pair of speakers, recorded them, and then sent them through YouTube, and you listen on a pair of headphones, and you're going to be able to compare and contrast and decide which speakers sound better.
Yeah.
That is worse than what Crutchfield is doing. Now,
yes, I agree with that.
What you're describing, is that the same as actually setting up the real different speakers and doing an A/B comparison that way? No, it's not the same as that.
No.
It falls somewhere in between. It falls somewhere in between the YouTube videos where nothing is controlled and we've actually brought in the real speakers and swapped them out and let you compare them head to head. This is falling in between because, of course, not every facet of whatever speakers like I mentioned earlier in the podcast, the dispersion, right? The dispersion of the in-wall speakers is going to be whatever the dispersion of those in-wall speakers is. If you had some really narrow dispersion electrostatic speakers and then compared to those some very wide dispersion, JBL Pros or Paradigm speakers or something like that, and then you actually didn't just sit in the one sweet spot that I'm sure they've designated in this demo room and instead actually moved yourself to side on the couch or something like that, well, your experience of the dispersion differences would not be replicated by whatever amount of filtering or EQ was applied. Really, all this can do is say, here's how this speaker measured in a specific setting. You keep everything the same, and the one thing we can replicate reasonably well is frequency response, as long as the in-wall speakers that we're using can at least reach the extension capabilities of any speaker that they're trying to mimic, right? If the in-wall speakers roll themselves off at 10,000 kilohertz, or 10,000 hertz, and you're playing a speaker that plays up to 20 kilohertz, well, they're not going to be able to replicate that very accurately. But if the in-wall speakers they're using are very capable, as far as the frequency response, you can mimic that pretty well, but there are certainly other facets of the speaker. You're not going to be able to change the transient response of the in-wall speakers, right? If the speaker you're demoing through them has faster transient response than the in-wall speakers themselves, can't do that.
Yeah.
You can't change that. So yes, you are right to criticize that this is in no way completely replacing actually hearing the different speakers, but I wouldn't go so far as to say it's just as bad as watching videos on YouTube and having no control whatsoever. It falls in between.
Yeah, like Rob said, I mean, what you really want to know is what are the speakers that are so good that they can recreate every other speaker on the market.
Right.
If that's the case, if that's the speaker you want. If that speaker is so good that they can mimic every aspect of every speaker on the market, that's the most accurate speaker there is. That's the one you should be buying. It means
it's the best in every category
and
can only be brought down to the rest of the other speakers out there. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Joe from Joe and Tell on YouTube. I don't know who you are, Joe, but I'm sure you're a very nice person who tells things to people on YouTube, which should be all accurate.
He's one of the good ones. He's one of the good ones.
I will take Rob's word for it because he's Canadian and he rarely lies. This isn't a question, but it will prompt some discussion that's a bit too long to put in our comments section. So we had a listener ask if he could just use the Odyssey Editor app to create and apply the Harman speaker target curve. We said yes, yes, he could. Joe wanted to make a bit of a correction since he has really dug into the nitty-gritty with Odyssey, including posting an interview with Eric Newman from Odyssey Labs, where they get into some details that aren't widely covered elsewhere. There are a couple issues when it comes to trying to create and apply the Harman speaker target curve and using only the Odyssey Editor app. The main issue is that Odyssey by default uses auto leveling for the overall output levels of the subwoofer versus the speakers, and it uses the levels at 80 Hz for the subs to match them to the levels at 1 kHz from the speakers. Okay. The Harman speaker curve would have you starting to boost the bass output up around 120 to 180 hertz. You can go ahead and use your finger to draw that curve, but your Denon Marantz receiver will ultimately still match the subwoofer levels at 80 hertz to the speaker level. So bottom line, you aren't getting the bass boost you expected unless you manually increase your subwoofer's trim level afterwards. And doing so can throw your curve off a bit, so it can require a bunch of back and forth if you're really picky about things, of which I am not. But yes.
But yeah, absolutely fair. Yep. That's that. I mean, that's the nitty gritty, but that's completely fair. Yeah.
I thought you were going to say more. You can turn this auto leveling off using the MultiQ X software now. It was actually an update since it didn't have that feature at launch, but that's a $200 software add-on if you don't want that to happen, and then you can go back to
in the editor app. The editor app doesn't have that feature.
Another issue is, depending on your room, sometimes matching the highest bass boost that falls within the range given by Harman speaker curve requires upwards of 17 to 20 dB boost in the lowest frequency, and the Odyssey editor app simply doesn't have that range. So I think it's much lower than that.
12, I think.
All of that said, Joe and Rob shared a laugh because Joe has actually talked to Dr. Floyd Toole about the Harman speaker target curve, and Dr. Toole has explained that it isn't a target you're supposed to aim for when tuning your system. The Harman speaker curve is a descriptive, not prescriptive curve. They built their JBL Professional M2 master monitors, which have been measured in multiple anechoic chambers and are essentially ruler flat in their response with very wide even dispersion as well. So there's the ones that should be used at Crutchfield. So they're confident the M2 speakers are accurately reproducing whatever signal is fed into them. Then they took those M2 speakers and measured their response in a bunch of different rooms, and those measurements, which include a range of response, especially in the deep bass, are the Harman speaker target curve.
Right.
It isn't saying you should EQ your speakers to have that response. It's saying that if you measure your speakers in a room and the response is way different than those speakers are, then those speakers are probably not going to measure ruler flat in an anechoic chamber the way the M2 speakers do. So let me rephrase that in a way that I understand, since I'm the one who just read that and I didn't get it. So you take a ruler flat speaker that is ruler flat in an anechoic chamber. You play that signal in a bunch of different rooms. On average, the response that you will get will look like the target curve.
That's right.
Okay.
So it's describing what a ruler flat speaker does in a real room. Because, of course, real rooms don't sound the same as an anechoic chamber.
Right.
So, like, look, you take away all the reflections of the room, and this is a ruler flat speaker. It's like, this is what the signal said to play. That's what it plays. Tells it like it is.
Right.
What's coming out of that speaker is what the signal said to do. Now we take it to a bunch of rooms, we measure it, we average it out, and this is what a ruler flat speaker looks like in a bunch of different rooms.
So the idea here is that if you took your speakers and you put them in your room and you took without any EQ.
That's right.
And you played the sweep through it or whatever, and then you measured it and you got something that looked like the target curve, then your speakers are more likely to be a flat speaker.
Pretty close to it, yeah. Because, most people don't have access to an anechoic chamber to go and measure their speaker. And Harman is largely coming from the side of talking to speaker designers when it's this professional measurement side of things, as opposed to talking to consumers. So yeah, it's the reverse of what a lot of people, like you were saying, it's descriptive, not prescriptive. They're saying this is what a ruler flat speaker does in a bunch of different rooms. We averaged it out. This is the curve you get when we know the starting point is a ruler flat speaker.
So the idea here is not to then take your speaker, which hasn't measured this way in your room, especially after EQ, which you definitely don't want it to at that point. Yeah. If you took your speaker and said, oh, with EQ, I'm going to make it look like this.
That's right.
That's not the idea here. No. That's not what you're trying to do.
This is a speaker target curve, not a listening target curve, not a room response target curve. This is if you are trying to design your speakers to have ruler flat response, but you don't have an anechoic chamber, you can only measure them in a real room, then when you measure your speakers that you're building in a real room, the response should look something like this. It shouldn't be wildly different.
That's what they would expect it to look like if it was a ruler flat speaker.
Yeah.
Not necessarily that it should measure that. might. It's going to measure something close to that because this is also an average of a bunch of rooms. And
there was a big old range, especially in the base, because they measured a bunch of different rooms, different sizes, different shapes, and they're like the range from these M2 speakers. The speakers always stayed the same. They are ruler flat in the anechoic chamber. The bass response they got in a bunch of different rooms. There's this big old gray area above and below the bold line, which is the average in the middle of the Harman speaker target curve. There's this gray area above and below because that's all the different bass responses they got when they took the same ruler flat M2 speaker to a bunch of different rooms.
It's also it's a steady state response, so it's not the response from playing a sweep. So you have all the boundary reinforcement, room gain, and group delay included, which is why the range in the deep bass is so large. It's hugely room dependent. So let's say that you're Harman, you're Dr. Toole or whatever, right? Yeah. And you take your ruler flat speakers and you put them in a room and you get this response and you're like, great, I got that response. Let's EQ the crap out of it so that we can get it back to flat where it should be.
That's right.
This would be like, I just wanted to make sure that my speakers were
the speaker is not the problem.
Yes.
Right? The speaker is is playing what you told it to play. You didn't tell it play 2 kilohertz at 86 decibels, and instead it played 2 kilohertz at 96 decibels, right? The speaker's to blame. You measured a difference that the signal didn't say to play, but is it because the speaker did something wrong, or is it because there's something going on between the speaker and the room? Now they've eliminated, for all intents and purposes, one of those gigantic variables. They know what the speaker does. The speaker is really, really accurate. It plays what the signal said to play. But the room is a gigantic variable. So, Joe was saying, Dr. Toole gets kind of upset when people are using the Harman speaker curve as their listening target curve.
Don't anger Dr. Toole, okay?
Well, I mean,
your home theater will be cursed forever. The
People
curse
can do
of Dr. Toole.
That's right. But I also found it because I read the paper. It's freely available at the Audio Engineering Society. You don't have to be a member or pay any fee or anything like that. And it's like it says right there, it's steady state. That means white noise or calibrated pink noise, whatever they were using, and probably a real-time analyzer or at most a fast Fourier transform. It's not a consecutive sweep, impulse burst tone or anything like that. It's not a chirp. It's noise just playing and playing and playing and measuring it on an FFT or an RTA and being like, here's what happens. That means you've got all the room resonance and everything coming in involved. So the idea that you are going to now use EQ to target that curve, you're not hearing what the signal wanted you to hear at your seat. It's just, this is what a perfectly ruler flat speaker would have done without any correction applied.
Let's put this in a slightly different context. If your target heart rate for when you're exercising is such, right, you wouldn't want to then go, well, if that's not what my heart rate should be or my blood pressure should be when I'm exercising, I'm going to try to make that blood pressure all the time.
Actually, it's even more like, I'm going to take a bunch of different people, don't know if they're in shape or out of shape. We're going to measure their heart rates when they're exercising, and then I'm going to target that for myself. No, you described what the average is for a bunch of people. That doesn't mean it's prescriptive that that's what it should be. It's just you're just describing what it is.
Right. Jeremy has a JVC.
We missed the last part.
Did we?
I'm sorry. Case on the Odyssey editor up there. Sorry.
In any case, Odyssey editor app has limits that we didn't mention, so Joe just wanted to correct us and clarify about that. People who really want to input the Harman curve will still need to pay for the additional software, either MultiQX or DRAC. But from Dr. Toole himself, that isn't Harman's recommended target curve, so it's pretty dubious to even be aiming for it in the first place, so just don't. And believe me, I will be writing an article, or maybe I will take all these words and reframe them and attribute them to Rob, and then thank, what's his name? Joe, whatever.
So, I mean, I just wanted to get back to, I'm not sure why I feel very simple concept of what I'm trying to achieve when I'm applying EQ to my system. I'm not sure why it isn't more prevalent or why there's honestly much debate about it at all. It's just like, if you play a sweep, we know that what the signal said to do was play all of those frequencies at the same volume. That there's no debate about that. That's what the sweep said to do. Now, you can have some debate about, okay, do we know for a fact that in every recording studio, actually we know for a fact that in every recording studio in the world, they don't necessarily have ruler flat response of themselves, right? The people making the recording, they have some curves in their rooms, but those curves are different. We don't know, and we certainly can't change our own system to match every possible recording studio in the world. You'd have to know what it is first and know what that curve is and then change it every time you change a song, right? It would be ridiculous. So what we do know is, okay, here's what the signal said to do. Is that what arrives at my seat? Like, I feel like that's really simple logic, right? It said, play all of these sounds at the same volume. Is that what reached me, or is it something
Everybody
else?
wants to feel like they have some insider knowledge that nobody else has. That is, and I'm being very serious here. Everybody wants to feel that. Everybody wants to believe that they know something that nobody, that there's a code that they're trying, whoever they are, is trying to keep from you. And the reality is that no one's got time for that nonsense. No one's got time to keep things away from you.
People who really gatekeep online, they do. But yeah,
not this.
Like I say, my own room, I got a very small room. It's enclosed. So in my room, I have a ton of room gain in the deep bass because it's a small room. It's enclosed. We know there's going to be a ton of room gain in there. I still, when I just listen to a sweep at very loud at 85 dB, I just listen to a sweep and I adjust my target curve so that to my ears, it sounds like that sweep is very nice and even in volume across the entire sweep. I end up with a little rise in my target bass response that I'm applying with Odyssey. I do. It's not a completely flat line. For my human hearing, I have a little bit. Joe said in his room, which is larger than mine, that he has more bass boost applied. But that makes perfect sense because our rooms are different sizes, right? So it's like, yeah, it's not that complicated, folks. It's like you play a sweep. It was meant to all be the same volume. I don't know why there's really
they just want to. They want to feel like they've got some special insider information,
something we didn't know about.
Yeah, and that if only everybody else knew. And I think that's how. That's how you get clicks too, is by saying I've cracked the Odyssey code. Well, you haven't. You didn't crack anything in that case. Jeremy has JVC LX-NZ3 projector. That's one of their DLP models with a laser light source, not the one of the DILA models that we're usually talking about when it comes to JVC. It's installed on a motorized ceiling lift that lets him completely hide the projector out of view when it's not in use. Fancy. Mm-hmm. The screen is also completely recessed in the ceiling. When it rolls down, it's 120 inches and it has a 1.3 gain. The room is not a fully dedicated home theater. The walls are white, but movies are watched at night with all the blinds closed, so it's reasonably dark. The image looks nice, but anything other than eco lamp mode, the cooling fan could be heard during quiet parts of the movie, so Jeremy has accepted an image that is a bit dimmer than he would truly like. He's now thinking he would actually like to have a larger screen, but the speakers are built into the front wall, so if he goes to the 135-inch size that he wants, it would cover his speakers, requiring an acoustically transparent screen. From what he's found, those tend to have a lower gain, and of course the screen size would be bigger, but he still wouldn't want an increase in the projector fan noise. Realistically, how much light would he be losing if the screen is, say, 0.8 gain instead of a 1.3? That's a lot, by the way, in case you're wondering.
Sure.
And 135 inches instead of 120, also a lot. His projector is 4.6 meters away from the screen, by the way. And Rob's going to give you the answer. I'm going to link something here if I can find it, and then I'm trying not to have to go to the bathroom to do this podcast, but I'm getting real close because I've had 2 cups of coffee.
If we go over the 2 hours to play catch up, then you probably should.
We're not going to do that.
Okay, well, so maybe one more after this, but I use Projector Central. Now they're referencing basically like the brightest calibrated image you can get, so they probably are using the high laser mode when they're quoting their figures. So keep that in mind. But the relative difference between you change the gain and you change the screen size, that stays pretty steady. There can be some small differences between different laser light output modes or different lamp modes, but in general, it's going to be in that vicinity. So just using their calculator with your 120-inch screen that you have now and the 1.3 gain that you have right now, this would be in the high laser mode. You'd be getting 233 nits calibrated on your screen. That's more than enough for HDR.
Right.
200 nits is about what you want for a really nice HDR experience from a projector. When you go to the larger 135-inch screen, if you dropped all the way down to the 0.8 gain, because he must have looked that up on a particular acoustically transparent screen he's considering, you're down to 119 So it's a 51% difference between what you're getting with the smaller screen and the higher gain versus the larger screen and the lower gain. That's pretty darn significant. That means, keeping all else equal in terms of you haven't changed your projector or the lamp mode or the laser mode, that's still sufficient for SDR. But really, you're not getting any HDR experience whatsoever anymore. And like I say, that was referenced to the high laser mode. So you in your eco laser mode are, if you went to 135 and 0.8 gain, probably below 100 nits, which means you aren't even getting standard dynamic range anymore. That's starting to get pretty darn dim for a projector. So yeah, I would advise, if you're going with that particular, either you find a different acoustically transparent screen that has significantly higher gain.
Yeah.
You would actually need to go up in gain if you wanted to keep the image exactly the same without changing your laser mode, which starts to get questionable because once you go above 1.3 gain, you start
hot
to
spotting,
hot spotting, flash lighting on the screen. You start tend to be able to notice that stuff. So realistically, you've got two decent choices. You either live with a little bit more fan noise and you boost up that laser mode and don't just stick with eco mode anymore, particularly for HDR. Anytime you go HDR, you're going to want to use a higher laser mode, or you're going to need to get a different projector if you make this screen change, particularly if you do go with the lower gain. You would need a projector that's, about twice as bright when it starts.
There you go.
Yeah.
Josh shares some photos of his home theater just for fun. It's got a gray theater with black acoustic panels and black everything else.
Right.
He has a Panasonic UB820 Ultra HD Blu-ray player and an X6700H receiver. Those let him bring up info screens where he can see the bit rates being used for video and audio. When he was watching The Thing on Ultra HD Blu-ray, he thought the image was pristine, one of the best he's ever seen, but the DTS-X soundtrack seemed a bit lacking, front-heavy, not much use of the surrounds or overheads, and not much LFE. According to the info screens, the video bit rate averaged around 90. Is that megabits?
Yeah, 90 megabits per second. Yeah.
Megabits per second, which is on the high side for most Ultra HD Blu-rays, and the DTS-X soundtrack averaged around 6.5 megabits. He popped in Ready Player One, the Ultra HD Blu-ray, a good-looking image, although he thought the thing still looked superior. In the standout Dolby Atmos soundtrack, the video bitrate was lower, which he thought made sense since the thing looked better. But he was surprised to see the audio bitrate was only 4.5 megabits per second, lower than the thing, but obviously sounded superior. He tried Hans Zimmer's Live in Prague on regular Blu-ray. Obviously, the video bitrate was much lower for 1080p, but the Atmos soundtrack on that disc, another standout that clearly sounded way better than the thing, was only 3 megabits per second. So his question is the bitrate of a disc soundtrack less relevant than the video bitrate? It seems to him, first of all, whatever. It seems to him that the video bit rate typically tracks with better looking discs using higher bit rates, but the audio bit rates don't track at all. Does that mean the audio quality is more down to the mixing and editing as opposed to the bit rate? If so, is there any objective way to point at something measurable to say disc A sounds better than disc B, or is it all subjective? I mean, there's a lot there to unpack. So the bit rate is how much data that you can send through. And obviously, the more data you have access to, as far as getting from point A to point B, the more definition, the more resolution, the more access you have to colors and everything else on the video side. And on the audio side, just the less compression or whatever, right? I mean, it's just more data. More data means you have.
It is more data. Like on the video side, we have these video compression codecs that basically what video compression is really, really good at is anything on the screen that stays the same. It can save piles of data.
Right.
When there's a bunch of, when every pixel on that screen is changing every frame, you've got to use a lot more data in order to preserve all of that detail and not have a bunch of it just, go into blockiness or turn to mush or just lose a bunch of fine detail. But it's all about the changing. So you could have a exceedingly pristine looking image with a low video bitrate as long as not much is changing, right? It's mostly still. There's maybe just a little bit of movement in one section of the image, but most of the rest of the image for lots of long shots is basically static. You could have a really low video bitrate and still have it look pristine because it's all about how much is changing on the screen. On the audio side, there is no apples to apples comparison between any of the DTS codecs to the Dolby codecs.
Right.
They are different companies with different codec technology. Dolby's codecs have always been more efficient. You have either subjectively or even objectively, just comparing the percentage of change if it's lossiness between Dolby Digital versus vanilla DTS, Dolby's codecs have always been more efficient. They don't require as much data to give you the same subjective or even truly objective, as far as a percentage-wise change, as the DTS counterpart. DTS's codecs have not been as data efficient. So it's not surprising that the DTS-X version had a higher data rate than the Dolby Atmos version. That tends to be just the way that they are encoded, DTS not being as efficient. But in both cases, we're talking about, on the discs, lossless audio. There is no difference between what went into either of those decoders versus what came out. There's no turning the dials or turning the knobs to make it better or worse. That's the amount of data that was needed to make whatever signal you're listening to lossless. That's as simple as it gets. So you can have a lower data rate in your lossless Dolby Atmos soundtrack on a disc if, again, thanks to the way compression works, it was actually like there was a bunch of similar notes. There was a bunch of sustained sounds. You can compress that to a lower data rate without losing any information at all. It's the changes that make all the difference, and then how efficient that encoding is. So if you want to just point at specs like this between discs, that's doing a disservice. Even on the video side, it's doing a disservice to think that you can boil it down to a number like the bit rate to say this disc has superior video quality because the bit rate of the video is higher. No, the bit rate of the video is higher because the image changes more frequently in that movie. That would be the primary reason for a higher bitrate on average across a disc, is there's just more change to the scenery. It doesn't tell you anything about the quality of that image. It could be a really horrible camera on terrible old film that was scanned really poorly, but the image changes a whole bunch, so it has a really high data rate in the video bitrate. Doesn't mean the image looks any better, just in terms of perceived how good does it look. So yeah, it's doing a real disservice to boil it down to the numbers. That does not tell you. And then, yes, there is the entire subjective side, because, of course, the image that you're seeing depends on the camera, depends on the editing, depends on the
and from the audio side, you're very dependent on your room and your setup anyways. So and your calibration and
on the production side, the audio production side. Why is there not as much LFE in The Thing as there was in Ready Player One? That has nothing to do with the data bit rate. Absolutely nothing to do with the container it was put in. They didn't mix as many low frequency effects or as loud or as frequently in The Thing, which is a considerably older movie than Ready Player One. So yeah, it's not the data or the container. Those were decisions on the production side.
Yeah. In general, when we talk about bitrate, of course, it does give you access to more data, but that's what you're looking at as a measurement of what actually went through, not a measurement of how much could have gone through.
Again, you know what? Descriptive, not prescriptive.
That's exactly right. So it's telling you this is how much data actually went through the tube. It's not telling you the size of the tube. So at the beginning, when I was talking about your bit rate, what I was referring to was the maximum amount of bit rate that you can get through your tube. Sure. But it's not. That just gives you access to more data. But it doesn't tell you how much data is going to be pushed through. What told you how much data was going to be pushed through is what you saw. Now, it's very easy for us to make these attributions as far as I see this, and then this thing looks this way to me. I saw this number, and this correlation that I'm making, right? It's very easy to make these things and say, well, I've seen 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 or 10 discs, and it all seems to kind of line up. Therefore, it must be true. That's not how correlation works.
Correlation, not causation in this case.
Yes. Yeah. So yeah. I'm sure you'll be able to find a disc that looks very, very good that has very low bit rate. All right.
If not a lot is moving.
Who do we have left, Rob?
Well, okay, we do have several. So we've got Adam and Joseph. Now, those were questions that would have been on the list last week, maybe would have been first up this week type of thing, but that is going back away. So I'll try to shoot them an email if there's anything pressing in those. I'll have a quick look through those. And then ones that we had not that many questions that actually came in last week. I guess people heard what you said on the podcast episode that came out, or saw my tweet and held off a bit. but we did get things from Bob, Ryan, and Mike, and I think that's it. So there we go. That's on the list for next week.
So start sending your questions back in.
Yes, please do.
You can email us at question@avrant.com to get your question answered. We want to thank our listeners of the week. We want to thank our 137 patrons over at patreon.com, including Jared. Thank you, Jared.
Yeah, patreon.com/AVRant podcast if you'd like to sign up to make an automatic monthly donation. So big thanks to our 137 patrons over there. Jared, thank you very much for being one of them.
I want to thank Greg for sending Rob a bunch of stuff.
I should have brought it for show and tell, but I forgot to. But Greg, thank you very much. That was very nice of you. I appreciate it.
And the notes of gratitude for keeping the podcast going from Dan, Stan, Jared, Jeremy, Josh, Joseph, Bob, Julian, Brannon, and Rich. Thank you for thanking us.
There we go. A whole bunch of J's in between. I should have edited that and put Julian in with all the other J's. But Dan, Stan, Jared, Jeremy, Josh, Joseph, Bob, Julian, Brannon, and Rich, thank you all very much for your notes of gratitude and support. They're very much appreciated. And a big, big thank you to everybody who continues to listen and send in your questions.
For AVRant, I'm Tom Andrew.
And I'm Rob H. Now stay in and listen to something.
Want your question answered? Send it to question@avrant.com. This is AVRant.
Now go out and listen to something.